Okay. Hey, everybody. Thanks for joining us today for our Walking Fellows Institute. We're glad that you're here. Before we get started, I wanted to let you all know that we've created a resources page where we will store everything, recordings, handouts, all of the material that we will include in this program so that you have a place to go for all of that if you need it. So I've put the link in the chat box. So if you want to go there and you can grab that link and then bookmark it if you'd like, so that you know where to access everything. And so as we go through material, I will continue to add it onto that page.
I don't see the link.
In the chat box?
Yeah.
Does anybody else see it?
I don't see anything. Huh.
Uh,
That's weird.
Yeah, I see it in the chat box.
I see it too.
Okay.
We'll
I'm the only
email
one.
it as well.
Okay.
Yeah, we can email it out.
Oh, there it is. Mine just
Okay,
showed
good.
up.
Okay.
Thanks.
Okay, good. All right. Elaine, do you want to introduce Carol, today's presenter?
Sure. So on that link is a good biography of Carol. So I'm not going to read through that, but let me tell you a little bit about how we met. She was working for Tool Design, and we were trying to understand how to better serve the people who are using the transit system in Boise. And although we didn't get the grant, worked hard with Carol to apply for a grant to understand how to engage folks as they were walking to our transit system and the kinds of things that we would ask them, the kinds of things we try to learn. And in doing that, I was just incredibly impressed with her depth of knowledge about all things walking, but especially older adults and vulnerable users, and also her attention to detail, attention to driving decisions through database processes. And so it was for those reasons that I talked to Cynthia and we invited her to participate today. And I believe that you guys will be very impressed and that you'll learn a ton, because that's what you're here for. And with that, thank you, Carol, for agreeing to present.
Happy to do it. And let me start out by saying one of the difficult things in putting together materials for a 1-hour class on walking is limiting what you provide. So this is the beginning of your journey to learn. And I would say never stop thinking about what you experience when you walk, what the pedestrian network is like, and how you would like things to be. So let me X out of that, and I'm going to share my screen, and we will get started. Okay, see if I can do that. Okay, welcome, thank you. I took this picture. I saw these people walking on a trail and they jumped up and down, and I said, oh, do it again. I want to take your picture, so I love it. So last week was your first class, and you read some materials and had some conversation. Today, we're going to continue that. We're going to talk about the benefits of walking, understand how walking changed with the advent of cars, the ways that cities design their infrastructure that make walking possible or not possible. And then we'll get to a point where we're going to introduce the term complete and comfortable and understand what that means. And there'll be some final thoughts. I'm going to ask you all to think about a particular question to end this session. There are 3 little images here. This one means that we're going to take a deeper dive into something that you might have talked about last week. This means the resources PDF that I think Cynthia sent out a few hours ago provides more information about the information on a particular slide. And this, as you might imagine, means I really hope that we can have a conversation about the content on that slide. Any questions before we get started? Okay. So the benefits of walking. Here we go. Our first one. So please unmute yourself and tell me what you feel the benefits of walking are.
Health.
Right? Right?
Exercise, getting to know your community better by walking.
Right? Anything else?
Stress relief.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I agree.
Reduce
I was gonna say,
carbon
like,
footprint.
treatment of anxiety.
I'm sorry, I heard carbon footprint reduction. What was the other one?
Treatment of anxiety and depression.
Yeah, yes, yeah. I was listening to something the other day that talked about go for a walk. So those are great, and these are you're on target with some of the things that I put down. Thinking a quiet time. I think somebody said something related to that, and also an appreciation for the environment in which I'm walking. So last week you talked about what makes a walkable city. You read the Jeff Speck book. I actually have this one, and I have the one that ends in rules, walkable city rules. He mentioned these 4 reasons, 4 things that make a walkable city: a reason to walk, a safe walk, a comfortable walk, and an interesting walk. So let's unpack that a little bit and talk about what makes walking possible. There are really 2 things. First, you have to have a built environment that gives you places to go, that is safe and comfortable and connects to those places. But it really is up to you, the person, to decide to walk. Even if you walk with a mobility device, having the ability to get out and having the built environment be able to accommodate whatever walking needs you have is important. And sometimes just having somebody to walk with makes all the difference. So these are the things that make walking possible if you have a city that is walkable. Why is this important? There are three main reasons. One is the equity in the investment in public facilities. We know that on a dollar for dollar basis, more is spent on motor vehicle infrastructure. I suppose if we norm that to $1 of a sidewalk was equal to whatever it is in a motor vehicle travel lane, we still end up with far more dollars on other transportation modes. And so in order to have a complete active transportation network that's compatible with the motor vehicle network, there needs to be a fairness, equity in terms of the investment. It's important also because it brings health and well-being to both individuals as well as the local economy. And we'll have an example from West Jefferson, where you saw that in the resources, North Carolina, of how becoming more walkable really benefited their local economy. And then overall quality of life for the community and for individuals is contributed to by a good walking community and taking advantage of it. So big question, how did the car change walking for transportation? We're going to take a brief walk through history. You probably know this, but this is from the Congress for New Urbanism. You've read some of their other work. This is a kind of a timeline transect of what the street network looked like in the pre-industrial era. In the 1920s, we have this which is we call a traditional neighborhood grid, and you can see it's relatively dense. Things are connected. In the 50s, as the interstates, and 60s, as the interstate system was built, and we had larger roads that connected to that, you begin to see a less dense network and the beginnings of these cul-de-sacs, and the loss of a denser network, and also the loss of connectedness. And this is where we are today. We have a lot of subdivisions with maybe 1 or 2 entrances in and out, streets that dead end, pipe stems or cul-de-sacs. And that really changes the walking network and the way we travel, the way all modes travel. This is also what happens with interstates and larger roads. You have these local roads which tend to get cut off from freeways, and you have collectors. A local road, which might have been a really great walkable street, may become a collector road that connects to an arterial road that takes people to a freeway. So that really changes the way we think about walking for transportation, because the assumption is driving or some other motor vehicle mode is the priority. So I thought we could take a look at the road network of both Haley and Orofino and see if you can identify, either from your knowledge of the development of each of those cities, or just by looking at the street grid, when parts of the town were developed. So those of you from Haley, when do you think this part of Haley was developed? Or do you know? Can you unmute and just feel free to chat?
I think they did the road improvements in the early 2000s for Woodside to put the sidewalks all the way down Woodside Boulevard.
And so the street grid, when was the street grid sort of laid, and the land development, when did that take place?
When I moved here in '99, it seemed like it was already well established, like all the houses and streets in that area.
Okay.
Yeah, I was going
And
to
if
say
we-
80s.
Yeah. If we go back to this, it looks closer to maybe the 50s, but it could have been the 70s and 80s. And so you can kind of, just as you can tell the age of a tree, you can tell the age of a community by the street network.
Yeah.
I'm guessing that this was developed in the early 1900s or before.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And then I'm assuming that US 75 gradually became wider over time.
Yes.
And how does that affect, was anyone there when it was narrower? And how has walking changed as it's gotten wider?
It's more dangerous to cross the highway. It's
Okay.
kept the east from the west more separated. It has a lot more faster cars going past town and not kind of stopping and taking a look at what town has to offer.
Yeah.
I think all those things have happened
Because of that.
fairly recently, not that long ago, like 70s and later.
And sometimes a bypass will divert people from the center of town, and this is a road that goes straight through town and the center of town. And you're saying that it has the same effect on the community in many respects.
Yeah, I mean, it was three lanes, and now it's 5.
Yeah,
There's 4 traffic lanes and a turn lane.
a center turn lane, right?
I believe they did that in the 90s.
They widened it. Yeah. Okay. So Orofino, I know we have one person. How many people do we have from Orofino? Maybe one?
Myself and Lima.
Okay. So for some reason, I have some kind of flying bug in my office. I missed it. So if you take a look, Orofino is a little bit different. It really is kind of spread out. It's a little bit disconnected. There's one bridge over the river, US 12, and Riverside Ave. When do you think this is the original part of town? And when do you think that was developed in the road network?
Oh my gosh, I don't know the histories, but that's our oldest part.
Yeah,
I do know
Yeah,
that.
I
Maybe
see
the
maps from the 1800s.
Yeah.
yeah. And then if we go up to the northern portion, if you look at if you can see that grid and we go back to this, it almost looks like it was the 1950s, but you tell me this part.
Yeah, I would say it's definitely newer,
Yeah.
that section.
Are you talking
And
about
I-
the side on the west side of the river?
Yeah, the
Yeah, on the
riverside.
west side of the river. Yeah. Yeah. So you can, if you think about when the city was developed and what the street network looked like, you can trace the ability, the walking for transportation. There still may be walking for transportation down here, But given that there's one river crossing and the city is so spread out, it becomes more difficult. So this is what.
Yep, and that's why we're here.
And that's why you're here. That's right. That's right. And you know all this. You know all this. I'm giving you tools here. So this is an example of the difference between the miles of streets and the miles of sidewalks. And we've talked about the 1900s versus the 1960s. This is 2 neighborhoods in Seattle. One is Ballard, developed in the 1900s, 228 miles of streets, 40.4 miles of sidewalk. And that's because there's sidewalks, there are far more miles of sidewalk because there are sidewalks on both sides of the street, not just one. And what has happened in many communities as that street network kind of tore apart, became frayed, and began looking like this in East Hill that was developed in the 1960s, fewer miles of street. So people are traveling on, more people are traveling on the same street, and fewer miles of sidewalk because the sidewalk, this street has sidewalk on both sides, but if there is a sidewalk, oftentimes it's on one side. And again, that reduces the ability to walk. So I keep moving around my little, I'm going to get rid of this. I'll move it around, hang on. So we've lost connectivity. The street network became less connected. And in doing that, what we had before was pedestrian friendly streets where you could walk to places that you wanted to walk. The walking distances were shorter. There were more choices for walking, oftentimes on quieter local streets, because motor vehicle traffic was dispersed and there was less reliance on our arterials for all trips. And that's what tends to happen in suburban areas. But because that street network kind of was pulled apart, we don't have it. So we have fewer pedestrian friendly streets, longer walking distance, fewer choices of where you walk, and there's more traffic where you do walk. This is an example that we like to share of a 1 mile neighborhood. You can see the difference in the street grid. This is more traditional. This is Lollipop, more suburban. And if you were traveling to school, if you lived here and you were traveling to school, either as a child on your own or with a parent, on the left, you might be inclined to walk. It's a relatively short distance, maybe up to a half mile. On the right, given that you're here, and if you can trace this in your mind, you can see what the route to school is going to be. It's going to be longer, and you might end up driving. And once you come home, you need 3 left turns, and that, left turns are less safe than right turns for people driving. Not so sure about people walking with the advent of right turn on red, but this shows the difference in terms of that ability to walk or how you would travel to school from a relatively short distance. Yeah.
It's so interesting in our community right now. We're building a couple of new subdivisions, and the city has said and wants to remain on this path that we need to connect the neighborhoods. They've had, stubbed streets that gone nowhere when their neighborhood was done. And now there's a neighborhood to the south and there's a stubbed street. And they're like, we need to connect. And all the people in the neighborhood are like, no, don't connect it. We don't want more traffic. And one of the problems in today's climate is, there'll be more cars because we're so used to cars. Like back in the day, it would have been more walkers. But now there's like more cars driving faster. And so the existing neighborhood doesn't want that connection. And the city is saying, yes, we have to connect it. That is the best kind of neighborhood to make, when you connect, when you can all walk. And I have one right here near us, just to the north. I can't get to my friend's house because there's no connection through. I was riding my bike and there was no way to go directly. I had to go either back on the highway and around, or, or go through someone's property that, there might be a little easement, but I don't even know if there is one. And it seems so silly. This is like a perfect lesson to those people. You want your neighborhood to be connected.
To have the permeability. Kath, it's interesting that you gave the example of going to your friends, because we took out a slide that showed 2 houses back to back. And it's 7 miles, if you were driving, I guess, or if you were walking, it's 7 miles to go from one house to the other because of this sort of pervasive lollipop pattern. So I think it's a matter of expectation. You know, we have come to feel that a certain street grid, this is desirable because it's safe or quiet, but what it doesn't provide is that sense of a certain type of community well-being and community connectedness that often comes with a street grid like this.
Well, we've also said that like your property value is higher if you have in a cul-de-sac, like you're at the end and you just have open space behind or whatever it is, right? So we've all come to want the one on the right for some crazy reason.
Yeah, and I, you know, I can't tell you whether the analysis bears that out. It's certainly the way people feel because of a market value that they want that. But there is a move to have more, develop more neighborhoods, even if in their suburban areas, sort of mixed use with shops below and apartments above, or townhouses or single family homes. And those might have a higher value than this kind of suburb that is really disconnected or only connected by an arterial. But that may be. So the sense of how do you travel is related to the 15-minute city that you all read about last week. And we wanted to spend a little bit more time talking about that because Patrick had some questions. Patrick, can you, and I've prepared a couple of slides, but can you, I hope they'll answer your questions. Can you talk about what some of your questions are?
Well, basically, I'm a liberal arts major and I don't understand graphs.
Okay.
So,
Okay.
I'm not quite sure what these are depicting. That's
Okay.
really my question, and how
Okay.
and its relevance as well.
So I'm not gonna do this one, but I'll start with this one. This tells you, this dark circle, how far you can walk in 5 minutes, how far you can walk in 15 minutes for that 15-minute city. And the concept being that it's the distance that you can travel in 15 minutes depends upon the mode that you choose. These boxes really have a lot of urban planning information about the amount of geography, the number of acres, and the number of people that live there. And I believe the article that Elaine sent you has a lot more urban design information in it. I would encourage you to understand that, but for you as a walking fellow, to really think about the transportation system. So I understand this, and we call this as the crow flies. The crow doesn't, the crow may fly in a straight line, but oftentimes the street grid or the pedestrian pathways don't. This is an example of what we call a walk shed, and this is a 1/2 mile and a 1 mile walk shed for some schools in Georgia. So you can see that in a 1/2 mile with kind of a dense street grid, it's not a perfect circle, but it's a little bit more cohesive. On the other hand, this is right here is the upper limit of a 1/2 mile, but there's no way to get there. The 1 mile is far more of a ragged shape because of that street network. And you can see there's a lot of lollipop and disconnected streets here. So when you're thinking about how far you can go in 5 minutes, it's not as the crow flies, it's really what the street grid allows. So Patrick, I thought it might be helpful to, instead of looking at that circle one, to look at this one and another one. So this one says in a 1/4 mile, you can go, in 5 minutes, you can walk about a 1/4 mile. In 15 minutes, you can walk about 3/4 of a mile. assuming that the street grid allows or pathways allow. In 5 minutes, you can bike about a mile. In 15 minutes, you can bike about 5 miles. And the reason this gets bigger, this cone gets bigger, is because there are more acres in that. As you go farther, there are more acres, and assume a circle with a radius of whatever that distance is. There are more acres, there are more dwelling units, there are more people living there. I would encourage you to think about it this way in terms of a 15-minute city. What destinations are there or are needed for that 5-minute or 10-minute or 15-minute walk? If it's not just for enjoyment, what do you need? A grocery store? Do you need a library? Do you need the doctor? Do you need the pharmacy? If they're there or in the pipeline, are they accessible? Can you get to it in 15 minutes? Or does that freeway or US 75 make it impossible or difficult to get there? And for you as walking fellows, if not, what can you focus on to make those destinations accessible? Does that help, Patrick? You can say no, but
I'm sorry, I was muted. I'm sorry. Yes, it does help a lot.
okay.
Thank you.
This one, you're welcome. This one is more complicated because it has 3 transit stops in it, but it's the same principle. What destinations are needed? If they're not there, if they are there or are in the pipeline, are they accessible? If they're not accessible, how do you make them accessible? Okay.
Hey, Carol,
Yeah.
I have a question on terminology. This has commuter shed, and you mentioned a walk shed and a bike
Shed.
shed. Can you explain that? The word
Yeah.
shed?
Yeah, let me go back to this one. So it is the area that you can travel, is accessible. I like the term mobility. I know that the Congress of New Urbanism thinks it means get there really fast. I think it has more flexibility in it, but that you can get to or access the mobility you have within a geographic area by a particular mode in a certain amount of time, based upon the street network or sidewalks. And we do this a lot in Safe Routes to School work because, Safe Routes to School wants children to walk to school where they can, where it's safe, and where they can't to make it safe. And so if you say, and I'm not sure where the beginning point is, but if you say, this is the school, let's see how far you can get a half mile, let's say, traveling along here and here and here, that's the walk shed. Does that make sense?
Yep, thank you. Appreciate it.
You're welcome. You're welcome. So another way to think about this, another way beyond the 15-minute city is kind of the length and the purpose of trips on foot that you would make. And I think of it as walking very locally, walking which may be social or exercise, walking for daily activities to work or to school, to the drugstore, walking to the movies, or further destinations that might be part of your daily activities, but typically are for recreation or for rambling. And the pedestrian network might be different for that, but it's all connected. So very locally, pedestrian-friendly neighborhood streets are important for you to walk around your neighborhood. They don't necessarily have to have sidewalks. They could be low volume, low speed streets. And there also may be connector pathways, as Cass talked about. Wouldn't it be great if there was a pathway to get to your neighbor's house that wasn't on the street, but was a pedestrian connection? For daily activities, you might use these then to get to a neighborhood commercial. I call it neighborhood commercial, or to the school. And there you'd probably have trails and sidewalks. And then building on that for longer trips, You want more connector pathways and trails. So if you think about that, this might be 5 or 10 minutes, this might be 15 minutes, this might be an hour. And a little bit beyond the 15-minute city. Does anybody have any questions about this one? And hopefully it makes sense. Now, and if we're diving a little bit deeper, I'd like to introduce to you the concept of a person-environment fit. This is a really common term. The job fits me, the job doesn't fit me. We're good friends, we have a good fit for each other. And it's the same with the built environment. It needs to fit the people that are going to use it. And if it doesn't, they're not going to use it. And it may be contrary to their personal goals and preferences. And that affects how they relate to the community, how they relate, what their social connections are, the amount of physical activity they have, their quality of life, the amount of motor vehicle traffic in town, and the quality of the town. So, and we'll have some examples throughout of where, well, the easiest example is the Americans with Disabilities Act. We now have a built environment in many places that fit people with different types of disabilities. If it didn't fit, then they wouldn't use it, but because it does fit, they can use it. It's about those individual pieces, such as in Sandpoint, you've got this high visibility crossing here, pedestrian crossing here, curb extension that shortens the crossing distance, that creates a space for somebody to bike. If somebody's biking in a town, they go, oh, there are places for me to park my bike. So they might be encouraged to bike. You have a bench, people to sit, to enjoy, and people might walk into town because they can meet somebody and have lunch or go shopping and sit and enjoy it. This is another example in Seattle of a low-cost street, sidewalk, which we'll talk about more in a little bit. And then this is called a bus stop parklet. It doesn't have to be a bus stop. It can just be a parklet, a place where people can sit. It may be that they need to take a break. They've walked into town, they want to take a break and visit with some friends. So it's about the individual pieces, whatever they are, as well as the whole network. Now, this is Washington, D.C. I know this is not Orofino or Haley, but if you pull back from your cities and take a look, ask yourself if all those pieces are there to create the best pedestrian network and the best fit for people that live there. So that's a great, and I suspect you're going to say it doesn't, that you don't have this whole network and maybe it doesn't fit. So the question is, how did we get to what we have and how do we get the change that we want? This is a little way to think about it. And I suspect that you could design this yourself, but let's start with a vision for the city's transportation system. Does the city want it to be multimodal? Do residents want it to be multimodal? Does it need to be, is there a desire to have a motor vehicle priority? Is it based on funding, developer desires, local economic drivers such as forestry or agriculture or a college? Or some other type of industry. So once that vision is set, then policies and plans follow. And there are all sorts of policies and plans that are drawn from that vision. And you can see them listed here. That then drives the design of the cross-section of the road, what it looks like from right-of-way to right-of-way, sidewalk, bike lane, or sidewalk, street, or just street and curb and gutter, or street and shoulder. And then I always throw in parking lot requirements, but that's one of my interests. So it drives the design as well as the operation and maintenance. Do the sidewalks get cleared, or does the street only get cleared when there's snow? Is the bikeway cleared? What do the pavement markings look like? If all of this doesn't give the kind of walkable community that you want, the real wild card here is there needs to be a willingness to bend, to be flexible, to be innovative, and to adjust the preconceived modal priorities in the city. And that's the real wild card. So if we go back to this, it starts with a vision. I offer to you kind of a universal vision of 4 guiding principles that we used for a plan, a pedestrian plan in a community, in a county in Maryland that's mostly rural, but does have some urban areas. Build a pedestrian network that's meant to be used, maintain it so that it is used, design the network to satisfy pedestrian desires for safe, direct routes. Ensure the network is coherent. You need to be able to understand that this is a place for me to travel as a pedestrian. Continuous, it shouldn't stop suddenly. Connected to these destinations and ADA compliant. And as often happens, those 4 things don't happen because there's a space that's not available, or an unwillingness or an inability to see how to get the space or how to allocate the space. So that space needs to be allocated so that facilities are those 4 C's, meet design standards and best practices, and are ADA compliant. So these are the 4 that I think if you concentrate on kind of can help create the vision more broadly. So how do you create for your cities, which are rural, but they have urban areas? The question is, how do you create that cohesive network as your cities change from rural to more urban? And we're going to take an example from Haley. First, I want to show you, the question is, how does the pedestrian network develop and expand as you move from the more rural areas to the more urban areas of your city? So those of you from Haley and also those of you from Orofino, unmute yourself. And I want to ask you to think about the image I'm going to show you. And this is a street view coming from the north part of town into downtown, and see where you think it is here, and really concentrate on what that pedestrian network is. So this is the first one. You're now entering Haley, 25-mile-an-hour speed limit. Where's the pedestrian network? What is it? Can you see it? Thoughts?
There is none right there.
There isn't any.
No.
And I suspect you're in this T2 zone, this rural zone. Interestingly, I drove down the street, and just on the other side of that intersection, boom, there it is. So I think you might now be in the T3, the suburban zone. So what do you see here? Just on the other side of that intersection.
A newer sidewalk.
Yeah. And it sticks out a little bit. That bug is. Get out of here, bug. Now this is I don't know what it is. It's a little flying bug. Parallel bar crosswalk, little bit of a curb extension, a little bit of landscaping here. I'm not sure what's on does anybody know there's a little sidewalk here? Does anybody know where this sidewalk goes?
It doesn't go anywhere along Main Street. It goes up to the neighborhood, but they've just upgraded that whole corner, that whole street, just literally as we speak.
Okay. One of these days it'll be in Street View.
But yeah, there's going to be on the left side, there will be eventually a sidewalk going down,
all the way down,
heading south, because there's a new building going in there, and they're going to put in a sidewalk.
And that's the developer doing that, right?
That is us requiring the developer to do it.
To do it, yeah.
Yep.
So this is an example of where the road is there. There's a necessity to have the road, but a sidewalk on both sides isn't necessary because there isn't a destination. That's the thought. Whereas I suspect whatever the developer of this was, put the sidewalk in.
Mm-hmm.
This is an equity and transportation issue, why this walkable community and the pedestrian network is so important.
Well, and it also was annexed into the city.
Okay,
Like that whole area used to not be in the city. I don't know how long ago, but it's now, I don't know when it got annexed, because I live up in that neighborhood to the left of the screen, and it's the last neighborhood that is in Haley, the last one north.
okay. So let's go south a little bit more. Now we're getting, I think we're beginning to be in the general, maybe we're right here, the end of T3, the beginning of T4. And what's different about this than this one?
Well, the crosswalk is better. It's more visible.
High visibility, right?
It's part of
We
a
sh-
safe route coming down from the school that's to the left, so it has the RRFB.
Right, rectangular rapid flash beacon and curb extension, so it's shorter crossing distance on both sides. And the other thing that this curb extension on this side does is it defines the parking space. So motorists are not going to park so close to the crosswalk that it affects the sight lines of people driving and seeing children and maybe adults crossing the street. Anything else you see here?
I just wanted to add this area. So I lived in Ketchum for about a year without a car, and the grocery stores up there are way too expensive. So I would take the bus down here, and this whole area, like especially when you're first coming into Haley, is where people are going to buy groceries, because there's Albertsons right there and Grocery Outlet, and those are the two most affordable grocery stores in the area. And it's not set up well to give people access. And I don't know what like we could do to change it, but like speaking from personal experience, because of the infrastructure in this spot specifically, I didn't go grocery shopping as much as I would have, and I ended up, spending, because then it just would add a lot more elements to like the process of going to the grocery store. Like for example, the left side, or the side where there's no sidewalk, is where I would have to go to get to the bus stop. So there's a bus stop right there with no sidewalk. And,
Right.
I would have to jump through a bunch of hoops to get groceries, and then I would just end up spending a lot more money, or, like just, yeah, anyways, that's just something I wanted to add, like as somebody who's been in that position before.
I really appreciate your comment, because first of all, when we were talking about 15-minute cities, this is the question of, and you took the bus, so if it's about a 15-minute ride, are the places that you want to go accessible within that 5, 10, or 15-minute travel time based upon mode? And also what you said about it wasn't safe and comfortable for taking the bus in terms of getting to the bus stop. So it didn't, in terms of the fit for you, what was there didn't fit you. And so you changed what you did.
Yeah. And I mean, even like, we're talking about Haley here, but when I lived in Ketchum, even though technically Ketchum isn't a food desert, if you take into account, affordability, it is a food desert.
Yeah.
Because working class people can't shop at Atkinson's, or Village Market. I mean, it's so, I really didn't have any other option, and so, yeah, I mean, this area definitely needs a lot of work, because, it's where the two really only affordable grocery stores in the valley are just right here on the right side of that street. So I just wanted to emphasize, we take into that aspect, of the 15-minute radius, like that's where the grocery stores are, so it makes it even more important that be accessible.
right, absolutely, absolutely.
There's a bus
So-
stop to the left, on
Whoops.
the left side of that screen.
Is it here? I can't, is it here?
Yeah, it's like right there. Yeah.
And there's probably one on this side. So, oh yeah, because this is probably a pullout bay. Well, I mean,
Yeah,
in
it's
addition,
just, it's right,
Yeah.
like you take a few steps up that sidewalk, just that empty lot. You can't really see it. It looks like it might be a fence pole post or something, but that's where
Okay.
the bus stop is.
okay,
And then there's one behind this
Mhm.
on the right side, behind,
Okay.
that's off the picture.
okay. So let's go further south. Now, we're probably now getting into maybe here in this T4, close to T5. This is more urban development on both sides. There's sidewalks on both sides. And yet, what does the pedestrian network look like? Pedestrian infrastructure look like? Yeah.
Too big a highway to cross.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. It kind of, I hate to say it, but it kind of degraded from here. And again, this was school driven to here. So let's go a little
They
bit.
have, just to point this out, they have recently repaved Main Street and redid all the crosswalks up and down. So they're all bright
Okay.
and white.
But there's no lights, so you just have to
Right.
cross. It does seem like a wide road to have to cross without a
It's
light.
wide.
Yeah. And the question I always ask is this center right turn, left turn lane needed? Anyway, I'm not going to talk about the visiting where my daughter lives in Phoenix, where there's a mile and a half of the center left turn lane and there's no place to turn left. And there's a very skinny bike lane that half of which is in the gutter. And I keep thinking, yeah, okay. So now we're probably maybe in the urban center zone.
Yeah, this is the main downtown core
Yeah.
right here.
Yeah. And the pedestrian network is,
Still pretty poor.
okay,
I mean, the sidewalks where you do have to wait at the corners are really small. Some of them are punched out, so they're curb extensions, but for the most part, it's just not hugely safe.
so would you expect from back here, if we go through these, would you expect as you enter the city, the pedestrian network to be the same or to get bigger, more complex, more safe and comfortable as you go into town, into the center of the city?
You would hope it would get safer and more connected
Okay,
as you go towards
Okay.
the center of town.
yeah, okay,
Yeah, and it doesn't really seem like that's the case.
yeah.
And something to add, on top of just safety and all of that, it's really unpleasant to walk around Haley
Yeah.
on Main Street. You go a little off and it's fine, but just that big freeway and even driving, I'm constantly running errands for work down here, specifically in this area, that intersection. And it's not even fun to drive around in all those lanes, like we're talking about walking, it's not even pleasant to drive in.
So
It
this
just seems
is-
like a lose-lose situation.
So this is a state maintained road,
State
And-
highway, yeah.
state highway. What I learned years ago is state highways, the state DOT, and I know it's not called the DOT in Idaho, but their goal is to move people long distances from one town to another. When that highway is in the middle of your town, you don't think of it as a state highway. You think of it as your main street, and you call it Main Street.
Yeah.
Mhm.
And you want it to look like a main street. And therein lies the rub with local governments and community members
Mhm.
and state departments of transportation.
So
is
I
a
have a
huge
question,
conflict.
like a hypothetical, like this, their objective is to move people long distances. How detrimental would it really be if this was only a 2 or a 3 lane highway going through town?
I have been wanting that for a while. If you took the main core of our downtown area, however many blocks,
Mhm.
and turned it from 5 to 3, right? Just through
Yeah.
town, and they can catch up as they go out of town north, right?
Yeah, I mean, and we
Everyone
have
catches up
other
anyways.
spots on the freeway, like when you're like mid-valley and it's just one lane, you know, there's traffic when there's construction, but in general, I don't see that it makes that much of a difference.
Cities have
Yeah.
used different strategies. Sometimes there's a truck route that goes on more industrial roads and doesn't go through the middle of town, in order to make a main street in the downtown area. I'm looking at the time. Okay, yeah. So these are all things to think about, because it's the pedestrian transportation. It's the quality of the pedestrian network that can really affect the community as a whole.
Vitality of your community, honestly.
Vitality of your community, right. Now, one of the resources that that was in that packet is an example from West Jefferson, North Carolina. And this is, I suspect if we did an aerial view of Orofino or of Haley, this is the aerial view of West Jefferson. They had a relatively vanilla US main street, which was a state route that was scheduled to be repaved. And the town had a streetscape plan they wanted. They worked with the state engineer in their district, who was, we call a plan engineer. He's a planner and an engineer. And this is what they ended up with. They ended up with these curb extensions. The local ice cream shop now has outdoor seating. And if you listen to one of the videos, watch one of the videos in the resources, you'll see how it's really changed the town. And here is this state road. Now, it's not as narrow as it could be, but it has diagonal parking. It has fewer travel lanes, and it seems to carry a lot of traffic through town. So take a look at the resource in the PDF that was sent. This is an example.
How big is West Jefferson?
It probably is the size of Orofino rather than Haley.
How big is
It's up
that?
in the it's also up in the mountains.
How big
It's
is
in the
that?
west. You tell me how big Orofino is.
We've got about
5,000.
3,000.
Yeah, that's about the size. 3,000 to 5,000 is about the size. Yeah. This is another example.
Hey, Carol,
yeah.
sorry to interrupt. I just want to do a time check with everybody because we've got about 5 minutes to 4. So how many more slides do you?
Let's take a look. We got 20 some. What do you want to skip to?
Well, I don't know that I think we should talk about West Jefferson because I think it's a really good example because their main street is a state highway, correct? Or
Yeah.
did you just want
Yes.
people to look at the handout?
Well, we can do whatever would give the most value to the fellows.
So can people stay a little bit longer or because we will record this. So if people need to get going, they can leave and then they can check in later on the recording. Does that sound good if we just keep going? Okay. All right, let's keep moving along then. Thanks.
Okay, you're welcome. This is an example. This could be on the edges of your community where you have a state road that doesn't have a sidewalk, but there are people that live along this road. There's a gas station, there's a market. And if you just put in a little sidewalk in that public right of way, which is usually the edge of it is usually the utility pole, you can see what a difference it makes and enhances walkability for people that live. Again, we're at that 5-minute neighborhood or 5-minute city concept here. So we've talked a lot about the term complete and comfortable, and we've been talking about that all throughout the presentation. What does it really mean? This is another example that I'd like to talk about. This is, I think this is in the Northwest someplace. I looked up Kink FM and I couldn't find it. But this is a 5-lane road, center left turn lane, lots of commercial on either side, some sidewalks. What would you do to change this, make it safe and comfortable?
Well, you'd have to put visible crosswalks.
Yep,
I would narrow the lanes. You don't need
Yep.
these huge lanes are like at least 12 feet across. They could be narrower. And
Right.
maybe you don't need a turn lane the whole way through. Maybe you could get rid of some of that turn lane.
right,
But there's not even any crosswalks.
right,
There's also
So
no
this-
bike lane, it looks like.
right. And there is space, right?
Should
So
be
this is-
space.
This is a concept for it. You
Yeah.
can see the sidewalks are pretty crummy here. They're discontinuous. Remember, it has to be continuous
Mhm.
and connected. There's actually, I'm not sure if there's a sidewalk there or not. So first thing you may not have noticed is they undergrounded, that someone's concept of this is underground the utilities and you gain a lot of space.
Yeah.
Remove a lot of the driveways to these commercial establishments. And maybe you bring it around to, there's probably a street back here anyway. Make this the street that you access these. By removing those, you now can have a continuous sidewalk and you don't need that continuous left turn lane. This is probably the main way to get to the businesses back here. I wish there was a striped crosswalk here because here's a bus stop. Here's the other bus stop. They've left a space for it here, but whoever did this concept didn't put it in. Streetscaping, center streetscaping feels more safe, more comfortable, and can accommodate all modes. So we've talked about safe and comfortable, but we're really talking about, if you want to use kind of the term of art that we think of, we planners think of, is pedestrian network quality of service. How does the network serve the people walking? And you know what the elements are: sidewalks, buffers, safe crossings, at motor vehicle intersections and pedestrian intersections, also known as mid-block crossings, curb extension, signage, utility placement, lighting, all of these things designed and built and maintained and operated in a way that serves pedestrians can have a high quality pedestrian network quality of service rating. So think about, because I have that vision. I'm going to ask you to take a short walk with me in Lubbock, Texas. I was working on a pedestrian master plan there. I was in this office and the people that I was with wanted to go some field work. So I asked them to drop me off at the Starbucks, which was a mile away. And I said, I can walk back. And this is where I plan to walk, to this intersection and then cross to get to the office. This is what I saw on the way: non-ADA compliance. You can't really get to this push button. Wide crossings and along a 50 mile an hour speed limit road. And changing sidewalk widths and buffer. So this was a low quality of pedestrian network. The sidewalk ended, you can see it ended right here. Then it came back and then it ended again. So, and the distance between signalized intersections was, I should have crossed down here or here, but I waited. And by the time I got here, it's another almost 4,000 feet. So I'm going to cross here, right? But the sidewalk has ended and I'm walking along the gravel and I get to this point and this is what's there: a big drainage ditch. Worse, I'm thinking, well, I'll just cross. There's no crosswalk here and no crosswalk here. And I considered crossing with the green light here, but then thought, look at the number of travel lanes, I'm going to get killed. So I hitchhiked. I waited till the light turned red and went up to a woman that looked like me in a car, and I knocked on the window and I told her where I was going, and she gave me a ride.
Wow.
So think about this as an example of where it was not a good. It wasn't complete. It wasn't coherent. It wasn't compliant. It wasn't safe. It wasn't comfortable.
Like I said, I didn't have a car for a long time. I was living in Boise all throughout college and the year after. And in Boise City, I felt really mobile, even though the public transportation isn't the best. And then after I graduated, we moved out what's it called? Like, it's been a while now, Garden City or Garden something.
Garden Valley.
Garden Valley, yeah. And I would just try to get to the Walmart across the street to pick up my prescriptions. And it was like this. That's how it
It
would
was
go
like that,
every
right.
time.
Right. I hear you.
Yeah.
I actually think there are a higher number of crashes at Walmarts. I haven't proven that yet. That's my theory. So this brings us to the question of intersections. And we want to talk a little bit, we're going to use an intersection in Orofino as an example. Intersections, I did the screen capture and I counted the number of intersections, and I think there are about 30. I don't know if that's the right number, but it's a lot. Intersections need to be, they're the place where everything comes together. They need to be carefully designed. They need to accommodate all modes in a safe way. So I thought, and because there's so many of them, it is complex and it's a lot of work. I thought we could take a look at one. I think this is of interest to those of you from Orofino. So I thought if we did a little bit of a closer look at this intersection, you could give me some thoughts about what works for pedestrians and how it doesn't work. I also got Michigan Avenue here, and I think this is a pedestrian walkway down to the river.
So the only way that it works is because towards the river, there's actually a underpass, like a path underneath the bridge to get to the other side. Yep. So that's really the only way. So this is a very busy intersection there is a stop sign on the north part of that T. Yep. And there is generally a lot of traffic backed up. There is no sidewalk on that side of the road. On the, I guess that would be the river side of the road, right there. There's no sidewalk. There's barely a sidewalk on the other side of the road. So it's a very difficult, and there's no crosswalk. So it's very difficult.
Yeah.
So if you're crossing here, and you want to get over, where do you go? Or if you, okay.
So when I bring people, or like when I'm walking a group or when I'm doing it myself, I will walk along that road because there becomes a sidewalk. There's a little kind of mini park. It's just got like a statue in it. And there becomes a sidewalk that then you can take underneath the bridge to get to the other side of the road.
See. Okay, right here. So what is your vision for this?
Carol, we were up there a year and a half ago and did a walk around and talked about a couple of opportunities. Probably the one that people that grabbed the most attention was a roundabout. One of the challenges with that is that there's a fair amount of logging truck traffic from all directions on this. And so using a roundabout, you'd have to design it so that they could get around it. But the free right turns are very problematic. There's not good sight distance. The lack of crosswalk is very problematic. The city has been working with the transportation department to at least do a study of this intersection and see if they can figure out some options. So we'd love to hear what you have to suggest.
Yeah, I agree with everything that you've said, and I wonder if I wonder how much space there is. It seems like adding the sidewalks. Well, I have two thoughts. Adding sidewalks adjacent to or buffered from the roadway may be the easier part. You're right. It's what to do with this intersection that may be the more difficult part. Is there enough truck traffic, logging traffic, that a roundabout with a truck, what do they call it, truck apron would just wear out? Is it possible to do some type of overhead structure
It
Is it
seems like
possible
it
to do it?
is. There's also a lot of recreational traffic. Up Highway 7 is the Dvorak Dam, and there's a lot of both RVs and boats that come through this intersection to access that recreational opportunity. So a roundabout has some challenges, but we all think that it's possible.
Yeah, and it may not be, you know, I worked with Ian Lockwood, who is a really brilliant engineer, and he did all the cartoons, and he's also a cartoonist that was in the resources, and he does a lot of work on roundabouts, and they don't have to just be single. I mean, maybe something that's called a peanut shape or some other shape of roundabout can work. Is there I don't think there's a traffic signal here, is there?
There are no traffic signals in Clearwater County.
No. Right, there are
So,
no lights.
yeah, so there are, so a big problem with traffic signals, from what historically logging trucks have knocked them over. So anything that goes above the road needs to be like at a very kind of an extreme height.
Okay.
Because the logging trucks have variable height. Yeah, and it has taken out the lights that have been in the county previously.
I actually used to work with an engineer in Boston who hated traffic signals. He'd rather have roundabouts because he said people are always running into the signal boxes, and you know, they're expensive to install and expensive to maintain. So that makes perfect sense.
I mean, a roundabout is a great traffic option. It is, I think there is a lot of unfamiliarity for people in our area with roundabouts, and so there's a lot of hesitation when I talk about roundabouts with people who live in this community.
Yeah, the only good thing I would say about that is that the Lewiston, Clarkston area has built some roundabouts, and so that's it's a gradual education to how they work, and so that's been a good thing. But Dr. Lim is right; it's a lot of people don't understand it.
And the other question I have about a roundabout is for people walking and people biking, is you can certainly put space in the roundabout for them, but at some point they're going to cross. They may need to cross here or here or here, and that will require large, like the timber trucks, logging trucks, to slow down. You know, I know that the heavier the vehicle, the bigger the vehicle, the more distance it takes to slow down. And so that would be my question of how to make sure that if the roundabout is here, whatever it is, that the crossings, people don't get hit.
Yeah, there's a four-way stop just up from that as well, not very far up.
Up this way?
No, up Michigan into town.
East. Yeah.
So you've got your stop there, and then you would have the roundabout, and then you cross the bridge, and there's another potential stop depending on what way you're going. So,
and it's all 25-mile-an-hour zone right here.
Okay.
So from the bridge leading up to this intersection, there is actually a railroad crossing right before this intersection.
Right here.
Yep. So, you know, if you hit that going fast, it's an old railroad crossing. So people generally slow down before that railroad crossing. So coming from that direction, people have to slow down. And like she said, coming from the east, they have just usually left 2 blocks up as a 4-way stop.
Right here. Not this one or further east?
Further.
Yeah,
further, because this is a 3, okay.
Yeah, just one.
So this doesn't look like an active railroad line. Is it active?
No, it's not.
No.
just cars, just railroad cars sitting on it.
It's not active in terms of having moving rail, but it's not been abandoned and it's got railroad cars stored on it.
So a roundabout would need to accommodate, this crossing would need to remain.
Yes.
So it would probably be in this area. Okay. Yeah, those are, I agree with you that this is not a good intersection for people walking or biking, and that there ought to be a way to accommodate it. Somebody who's far brighter than I am as an engineer can come up with a solution for all of these sort of constraints that are there. But I think this kind of conversation is good because it brings out what the desires are, what the concerns are. So I would say continue to have those. Who owns this property? Well, I wonder, was this a road? Did this used to be a slip lane, a hot right going up that way? And was it at some point?
I think that is
changed?
city property.
Yeah.
There is, so the corner itself has, like, it's a memorial and there's a tree. And so there's a parking lot behind that corner where I think it's the prosecutor's office. But I think it's
Okay.
either city or county property on that corner. And so it's the corner itself is not drivable, but inside of that is a big parking lot.
Okay.
Yeah, I think
Well,
the
certain-
city. Go ahead, I'm sorry.
No, I certainly, and a pedestrian overpass, it's kind of seems like the easiest solution, but then you have to make it, people have to have it a way so people can get up to it and get down. So there needs to be ramp space for it. And it may be easier than redesigning and quicker to do than redesigning the whole intersection, which I think would take a long time and to get the funding to do it. Okay. Everybody ready to move on a little bit? Yeah, okay. Oops. So as we've talked about, we talked a lot about intersections, they're complex. It's important to take this whole cloth approach. This is an example from Rotterdam where if you follow, which we were just talking about it with that intersection. If you're biking, you can see the path of travel. If you're walking, you can see the path of travel. If you're driving, the same thing, and even transit. And those are the kinds of things that you're designing, thinking about a new design for that intersection that you want to pay attention to. Visible, slower speeds, designated direct pathways. You don't want to have somebody go if they could get over here, all the way over here to go underneath here to come back to get over here theoretically. That's not a direct path of travel. And then what I call pedestrian intersections, also called mid-block crossings are important. There was one that we saw coming into Haley for the school crossing, and it has a rectangular rapid flash beacon. So that's part of paying attention to all of those details for the intersections.
Can you tell us what the main benefit is to a mid-block crossing?
It's a benefit to the pedestrian. Oftentimes, you remember the example from Lubbock, where there was either 1,500 feet or 3,900 feet between formal pedestrian crossings. And, the speed differential for people walking and people biking and people driving is so great that pedestrians need a tighter grid, particularly if they're destinations to get to, such as transit bus stops or a school or a connection to a neighborhood. So the mid-block crossing or the pedestrian intersection makes that, the pedestrian network doesn't have to just follow the motor vehicle network. The pedestrian network is comprised of trails and connectors and sidewalks and places to cross.
So how does a motorist deal with, it seems like most motorists expect people to cross at crosswalks that
Yeah.
are at end of blocks.
Yeah,
And so when they come upon this, I mean, if they're going fast and then all of a sudden there's a mid-block crossing,
yeah.
it's probably not great for the vehicle
Well, it's
to
probably
be
not, well,
surprised.
for the person driving the car to be surprised.
Yeah,
That's why when you do pedestrian intersections, there's a public awareness that needs to happen.
yeah.
You know, they call it the 3 E's, the engineering or the evaluation. So you know that that's a place that people do cross unsafely, want to
Yeah.
cross. You do the engineering and you build it, and then you do education and enforcement. You have a
Yeah.
period to let people know what's happening, and then you do the enforcement.
Mhm.
It would be very cavalier of me to say, I don't, they can get over it, but over time, it's important. This does not have a rectangular rapid flash beacon. This one doesn't, but the one that we saw in going into Haley does, and that's really important. The studies from when that RFSBs came out said that 80% of the people, it doesn't require people to stop, it requires people to yield, and the yield rate is about 80%. A hawk, that pedestrian activated light that has a red phase to it, so people have to stop, ensures that people stop. So that's another option. And it only is activated. Yeah, go ahead.
I'm just curious where this is.
This is in Charlotte, North Carolina.
Okay.
Yeah.
But Carol, isn't it true that with the mid-block crossings, they're typically not found in places where there's a dense grid of street network, where there would be natural crossings at intersections? They're often in places where there's a long distance between a place where you'd otherwise have a crossing. Not always, but
Yeah.
sometimes.
I think you're seeing more and more exceptions to that. The office where I worked in Silver Spring, Maryland, Silver Spring is really dense. The streets are not that wide. It has a pretty good pedestrian network, but the walking access from the transit station up to what used to be the Discovery Channel building, and then beyond, and then there's a pedestrian plaza, had a mid-block crossing. And it had a hawk signal on it. So
when you say this is generally like for areas that are more spread out, is that like worldwide or in the US? Because I feel like I've seen a lot of places in Europe have infrastructure like this that are cities. Like when I lived in Madrid, and this looks just like how it was, and you could get anywhere you wanted to.
Yeah. And that's the cultural difference.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Just like prioritizing pedestrians, or
right.
Like, okay.
Yes. Yeah. This is a quick example. I know we're running really long on time. This is a shopping center in Paso Robles, California, where the Public Housing Authority has identified this location to build a 2 or 3 story apartment complex for older adults. It's desirable because it's along the Riverwalk, and there's a Kohl's, there's a Walmart, there are grocery stores, there's a bus stop here, and a bus stop here. So it's a walkable community. But if you take a look at that intersection, it's a long crossing. There is not a median refuge for older adults who would be walking to get the bus. So that needs to be addressed. But more importantly, there's a missing crosswalk here. So, and remember this, so if this is the path of travel that the pedestrians would take, and they want to get to this bus stop, because that crosswalk is missing, they would have to cross 3 times to get to it. So this is an example of the attention to detail that's needed for intersections. And when it's not complete, when it's not connected, when it's not coherent, particularly, then people aren't going to use it. I've encouraged the director of the Public Housing Authority to push the city to put a crosswalk in. I don't know that he will, but we'll see. These are signalized intersections. We talked a little bit about mid-block crossings or pedestrian intersections. There are other motor vehicle intersections that are unsignalized, and in the resources that we gave you, there's information on the STEP program, FHWA, Safe Transportation for Every Pedestrian program. They identify 1, 2, 3, 4, 7 things to do. Lighting and signage, a raised crosswalk, which I have an example in a couple of slides. Pedestrian refuge island, which is in the middle. It shortens the crossing distance, allows people to cross in two swipes rather than just one. It reduces the risk. The pedestrian hybrid beacon, which is the POC. A road diet, which we saw where you reallocate the motor vehicle travel lanes and narrow the number of the width of the travel lanes and the number of them. Rectangular rapid flash beacon, which we talked about, and leading pedestrian intervals, which really is not for it's for a signalized intersection, which gives pedestrians 3 or 4 seconds to start across before motor vehicles get the green arrow. And what that does is it makes them visible to motorists, particularly turning left and right. So please take a look at that resource. And if you want to talk about it more at the end, we can do that. This is a great program. So I'm just about at the end. We've had some really good conversation. And I want to remind you that to focus on doing the right thing, and there are 4 of them. The last one I'm going to ask you to talk about. The first is when you think you're done, when you think you've put something in, you probably aren't. So see what else you can do. There's a curb ramp here, but it's not maintained. There are sidewalks here, but this is in Baltimore, but there aren't places to cross. This is in Wichita, Kansas. There's a sidewalk, but it hasn't been maintained. And actually in this neighborhood, people walk in the street. This is a person environment fit thing. And this is a street in Seattle that's very steep, and I discovered I could walk up it. I couldn't walk down it until I found these stairs. So think about what's needed to make it usable for people. Go one step further. Don't let the perfect be the enemy of the good. See what's possible and good, not necessarily perfect. These are low-cost sidewalks that Seattle puts in because they're committed to building out their pedestrian network. If they don't have enough funding, they will put in blacktop, asphalt, and this car stop to define the curve and ADA compliance. And then sometimes later when they have the funding, they'll put in a concrete sidewalk. But oftentimes the neighborhoods will say, we're happy with this, keep it. If you've got alleys, find a way to make them pedestrian spaces, not just for motor vehicles. This is one in Boone, North Carolina, where there's travel in one direction for people driving. And this is a pedestrian walkway that's protected from people who are driving, turning in. It also opens up space. So a building has 2 front doors, one on the street and one in the alley. This is in Alexandria, Virginia, where the sidewalk ended. There's an Episcopal high school here. I don't know why there isn't a sidewalk leading to a bus stop right here. So they had a bike lane that's going uphill here. So they widened it, put some vertical separation in and made it for pedestrians and bicyclists. And then where the sidewalk appears again, they narrow the bike lane and pedestrians go on that sidewalk. So don't let the perfect be the enemy of the good. Insist on the pedestrian's perspective, not the motorist priority. This is an example of that speed table crosswalk near a school in Alexandria. It could have been fine with just a high visibility striping for this crosswalk, but having the speed table says pedestrians have a priority, and the speed table engineers in that slower speed for people driving, just like that railroad crossing does in Orofino. This is an example of a very busy intersection where the person is going, not really sure how to cross. I'm not sure what the takeaway message is here, other than it looks like motorist priority, not pedestrian priority. Lastly, stop saying, and I don't know that you're doing this, but don't say, or don't stop trying because you assume that it cannot be done, because maybe it didn't happen before. Maybe think about what's changed, or think about a new way or some new research that's available, and keep pushing. I just added this before our session. I told Cynthia, this is from a book called The Mysteries of Harris Burdick. They're beautiful illustrations, and you can imagine how this ship got into town and what's going to happen. So I encourage you to do the same thing. Think about what can happen if you can turn that ship and bring it through town and make the change that you want. So if you could unmute and maybe talk about what's changed in each of your cities and how you can sort of use that to leverage it to get some of the network changes that you'd like. I'd love to hear from you.
So we just have a couple minutes left. Would anybody like to add? I have one thing I want to say. I look at this picture and I think this group is hardly going to stop pushing.
Good.
So
I think in Haley, we've had some good success putting in more. It's more bike lanes than strictly pedestrian. It's a big biking community, and so we think bike first. But we've had some really good success with getting grants and putting in some new infrastructure that the community really, really likes. And I just think we need to carry on with that, momentum and don't stop. And there's so much work to be done in Haley, and to look at the positive places where we have made changes and keep carrying that through the community. Because we know that there's a lot more work to be done.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of people that see the benefits and are willing to, try to push for more. And we have a good council now that is pretty bike ped focused. So that will continue to help Haley at the moment. If we can get more money to build more infrastructure. We have a real issue with ITD, unfortunately. And we have to have stronger spokespersons for doing the right thing for bikes and pedestrians, and not settling for what ITD says. Right. Hey, it's our state highway. We have to do that. We have to do this. I don't want to settle for that. So, yeah.
That all sounds good. And it sounds like you've done a few things. It's worked. You're getting grassroots support from the community, and you're going to continue to build on that.
Well, we need to one thing we do need to do is reach out more to the community for more grassroots support. We have council trying to lead, and we had some good grassroots efforts, and we haven't rekindled that in a few years.
Yeah.
But it's time to, I think COVID stopped everything. It's time to pick that up again. And
sure.
And I think the grassroots support is probably one of the biggest benefits we can get to getting more bike ped infrastructure built. Grassroots support is huge.
Yeah. And it is hard to sustain that over time. I understand. And COVID didn't do a lot of us many favors.
Yeah.
So hopefully you can rekindle that.
Yeah.
What about in Orofino? Is anyone here? Diane, is Diane? Yeah, I have been here 7 years, a little over 7 years, and there's been a lot of like brainstorming and a lot of good energy and grant writing, and we have a skate park that's like, I don't know, like we still do not have more sidewalks or, any more significantly more trails. So I don't know. I can't say we've done like giant improvements in the last 7 years.
It sounds like similar to what Kaz said. There's a bike focus, and it needs to kind of shift that to a pedestrian focus.
Well, I really wish we even had a bike focus. Like, our town is so unfriendly to bikes as well.
Yeah. Well, hopefully, I think as a walking fellow, you will end up with a project. I think that's the plan. And that could be a catalyst for getting people, that aha moment for people, to see that the pedestrian network has been neglected, but it can change. I tend to be a glass half full person, so although we're trying to get a trail built, designated where I am in Maryland, and somebody said to me, Carol, it's going to be today. It's going to be a long, long time before this property owner agrees to it. And I'm like, okay, whatever. Let's keep thinking it's going to happen. So, yeah. Okay.
Yeah, I mean, eventually my goal, I always would love, like, we have so much rail line that is unused. It's just storing cars. And every time I drive past them and along them, it's just, there's so much potential. And I'm hopeful. I'm not giving up.
Good. Well, that's the end. And I appreciate your patience, and most importantly, I appreciate the conversation that we've had today. Any questions?
Well, thank you for all your good insights and information and giving us some tools. I'm excited to, continue asking for more, because our community needs it. And it's good to see other projects, what has happened in the past with other places, and use some of those examples.
You're welcome. I enjoyed preparing for today and meeting everyone today. So
Thank you, Carol. That was amazing. And like I mentioned to everybody, we've recorded this. It'll be on the resources page. Before we all take off, I just want to remind everybody that June, we're going to be talking about developing leadership. And so our next gathering will be June 9th, Thursday, June 9th. You should have a Zoom link. And next week, we're going to be in Haley on the 1st. So we'll get to see the Haley folks then. Elaine, anything else you want to add?
Yes, I got invited to testify at Congress. And so June 9th has become kind of a problem for me because I'm going to be traveling. So I'm going to be sending out, and that is when Cynthia is also traveling. I'm going to be sending out email asking if we can find a date the next week instead to replace that June 9th, because I will be traveling back from back east.
I will also not be here. I'm leaving on Monday, and I won't be back until June 14th.
14th. Well, I will send an email then, and we'll hope to have it on June 14th or 15th instead, if that works for folks.
Yeah, I'm going to be in the wilds of Alaska for 2 weeks.
That sounds more fun, but it is kind of an honor to get chosen to testify. So
yeah, that's amazing. Tell me what you're testifying for.
The Transportation and Infrastructure Committee in the House on safety.
Awesome.
So
that's very exciting.
It is. It's quite exciting.
So you're presenting in front of the Transportation Committee?
I am.
Wow. Fantastic.
I'm the chair of the National League of Cities Transportation Committee this year, so
Wow,
I'll be
that's
representing
fantastic.
cities.
Nice.
Anyway, so look for an email, and but this has been great. Really excited to move forward with the next module, and thank you, Carol.
You're welcome. You're welcome. Good luck, all of you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Carol. Appreciate it. Thanks, everybody, for joining us today.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you.